Hi, I'm Tasha from One Big Happy Life on behalf of the Financial Diet, and this is the Lifestyle Fix brought to you by Skillshare. For a lot of people, springtime means home buying or selling time. In 2017, over 2 million people purchased their first home. So today, I thought I'd share my own experiences as a first-time home buyer. I bought my first home when I was 19 with a 6-month-old daughter, Alexis. At that time, I was a single mom working full-time as an active duty Marine, and I was making around $24,000 a year. First, let's start by talking about my housing situation up to that point. When I found out I was pregnant with my daughter, I was making $14,000 a year and living in a military barracks. I had 2 other roommates and slept on top of a bunk bed. The only things I owned were my clothing and a small radio with a CD player. You see, single, lower-ranking enlisted people were required to live in the barracks, which meant that the military could pay me less because it was providing my housing and my food through the mess hall. But once I became pregnant, I started looking into my options because I knew I'd have to move out into my own place at some point. Now, the thing that most Marines defaulted to was to get on-base housing, apartments or houses where the military pays for everything, similar to the barracks. But then I learned of another option, living off base and receiving a housing allowance, aka increased pay of $744 a month. So of course, I looked into how much the off-base rentals cost and how much housing allowance I'd receive and realized I'd get a much better deal if I ventured out into the civilian world and got a place on my own using my housing allowance. Now, according to the military regulations, which is basically the guidelines that govern everything we do in the military, a pregnant Marine wasn't eligible for BAH until she was 7 months pregnant. But recognizing that as a single mom, I was going to have to buy a lot of things before my baby came, and the sooner I moved out, the more money I could make, I decided to petition the battalion commander to be allowed to move out at 4 months pregnant instead and move off base instead of living in military housing. And he said yes. I learned some really important life lessons right then that were also really helpful as I went through the home buying process. First was the importance of understanding the rules of play in any situation. In this case, those rules were the military regulations. I made sure that I understood what the regs did and didn't say so I could use that knowledge to my best advantage when petitioning the commander. Second, I learned the importance of doing my own research and not just following what everyone else was doing under the assumption that the crowd must know what's best. That led me to asking for a housing allowance instead of going with the easy route and getting on-base housing provided for me. Third, I learned the importance of going after what you want and being your own best advocate. I could have just accepted that I wasn't going to be able to move out until I was 7 months pregnant, but I took a chance, wrote the most compelling letter that I could to the battalion commander, and it paid off. Now, fast forward 10 months, 1 shared room in a house, 2 apartments, and 1 adorable little baby later, and I'd come to the conclusion that I absolutely hated living in apartments. So I decided to research what it would take for me to buy a new house. Now, everyone thought I was crazy, of course, because there I was, 19 years old, single mom making only $24,000 a year. Not exactly what you'd think of when it comes to first-time home buyers. I actually had people tell me that there was no way that I would ever be able to buy a house. Instead of listening to those people and limiting myself to what they thought I could accomplish, I turned to my new favorite life skill: research. I searched on the internet and learned all about how mortgages worked, how to qualify for one, what kind of credit you needed, and what I'd have to do to qualify for a VA loan, which is a special type of mortgage available to military veterans. Here's what I learned in a nutshell. Qualifying for a mortgage really comes down to 4 major things. 1, how much money you make and how stable it is. 2, your credit score. 3, your debt to income ratios, and 4, having cash for closing and or a down payment. Let's talk about how I tackled these one by one. First is income. As an active duty Marine, I had a stable income, so that was great. Of course, I wasn't making that much money, which will come into play later when we talk about the debt to income ratios. Second, the better your credit is, the easier it is for you to get a loan. Unfortunately, my credit wasn't great, thanks to a credit card that I got when I was 14, maxed out the $500 limit, and then never paid it. By the time I decided to buy the house, I had just about finished paying off the balance and all the accrued interest. The good news is that mortgage mortgage companies allow you to write letters of explanation for blips in your credit history. I explained the situation, showed that I paid the card off in full, and pointed to my otherwise spot-free payment history on my other accounts, and they gave me a credit score exception. Of course, I did have to end up paying a slightly higher interest rate at 6.5% versus the 5.5% that I could have gotten with excellent credit. Third is debt to income ratio, or DTI for short. There are two DTI ratios that lenders focus on, front end and back end. The front end is a percentage that's calculated by dividing your total mortgage payment, including principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, and dividing that by your gross monthly income. The back end includes all of your required monthly payments with the new mortgage divided by your gross monthly income. Lenders typically prefer a front end ratio of no more than 31% and a back end ratio of no more than 43%, although they do make exceptions. In my case, I was able to push the front end DTI to 33% because my back end DTI was only 36%, since the only debt I had then was my car note. With those DTI ratios, I qualified for a $100,000 mortgage and a $700 mortgage payment, less than I was paying in rent at the time. The last and biggest hurdle I had to overcome was the down payment and closing costs. At that point, I hadn't had enough time to save much for those things, which meant that I might have had to put off buying a house until I did. But here's how I worked around it. First, I used my VA loan, which allowed me to buy a house for no down payment and no mortgage insurance. That allowed me to buy a bigger home that I otherwise would have been able to afford. Without my VA loan, I could still have used a 0% down loan, but some of my DTI would have been eaten up by mortgage insurance, which would have meant qualifying for a smaller loan amount. So I might have gotten a condo instead of a house. I could have also gotten an FHA loan with a 3.5% down payment, but that would have delayed my home purchase by 6 months or so. So I'm glad that I had access to the VA loan, but I wanted to also take a moment to note those other valid alternatives because I know that not everyone has served in the military, and I want to show that there are still other viable options out there for low or no down payment loans outside of the VA loan program. As for the closing costs, I decided that I wouldn't buy a house unless the seller agreed to pay my closing costs. Since then, I've purchased 3 other houses, and each time I've always included a stipulation for seller paid closing costs, including when I built a brand new construction with a builder. That was my second house, by the way, a 1,500 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath that cost me $140,000. Starting with my very first house, I've always crunched the numbers and known exactly what I qualified for before I ever reach out to a lender. By the time I submit an application to a lender, I already know I'm going to be approved, and there's so much power in that because it makes it easier to negotiate with the lender, or better yet, get lenders to compete with each other's offers. After interviewing several realtors, I found one who was knowledgeable and who took the time to understand my budget and what I wanted in a house. I ended up buying a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,100 square foot townhouse for $97,000. The whole process from deciding to buy a house to closing took about 3 months. I still remember how good it felt to walk into my new home and roll around on the carpet in my very own house. It was just the best feeling. I was so proud of myself for accomplishing this big dream of mine, this thing that other people told me I could never do. And after I'd actually done it, bought my first house as a single teen mom, so many fellow Marines started coming to me, people who were more senior than me, making more money than me, asking for advice on how they could purchase a home too. The lesson I learned there, and it's one that I've encountered over and over in life, is that critics and naysayers are plenty and they are loud, but you don't have to give them any weight in how you live your life. They don't have to live with your decisions. You do. So now that you know how I bought my first house, let's talk a little bit about what I did wrong. With my first house, I took out the maximum amount that I could qualify for. Back then, I reasoned that as long as my mortgage payment was lower than my rent, I was golden. But that's not true. Homeownership is expensive, and I quickly learned that the things that I wanted, like home repairs, projects, furniture, basically everything about being a homeowner costs a lot of money. Luckily, the market was incredibly hot, and I was able to sell that house within a year and a half with a $14,000 profit and buy my second house. By then, I was married, and while we were offered a $180,000 mortgage by our bank, we focused instead on the amount that we felt comfortable with, given our budget and given that we intended to leave military service. Since then, I've always purchased a home using a single income, meaning that I purchased half the home I could qualify for, including the home that I currently live in. Over the years, I've gone back and forth between renting and owning, and I can say without a doubt that I prefer being a homeowner, regardless of whether it's the most cost-effective option. But I've also had to deal with the frustration of paying for a home in a city I no longer lived in because of a sudden job move. Buying a home is a big decision, and it's really important that you do your research and really think about if homeownership is the best option for you given your vision for your life. I'll drop a few resources for you in the description box below, including a link to a new home budget spreadsheet and a playlist of videos I created about the home buying process. Now that I've shared a little bit about my first-time home buyer's experience, let's talk about a great place to learn some new things, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes in design, business, technology, and more. Premium membership gives you unlimited access to high-quality classes on essential topics so you can improve your skills, unlock new opportunities, and do the work you love. Looking to brush up on your lifestyle photography skills so you can deck out those empty walls of yours? Check out Mark-Marie Forsberg's class, Lifestyle Photography, Capturing Inspiring Visual Stories, where she teaches you how to capture stunning stories in a styled yet natural way. Click the link in the description box to join the millions of students already learning on Skillshare today, and to take advantage of a special offer just for TFD viewers. The first 500 visitors will get 2 months of unlimited access to over 25,000 classes for free. Act now so you don't miss out and start learning today. Thank you so much for watching this latest episode of The Lifestyle Fix, and be sure to tune in here next Friday, same time, same place. See you then. Bye.